this is Anna. Welcome back to Painting Big. So today we're doing a little bit of a step aside from the OSL stuff because I've been getting some questions about various topics, and so this month we're going to tackle actually layering troubleshooting. Just for the people who've watched my fundamentals videos and they're still like, I have questions, I tried to do it, it really looked bad, what am I doing wrong, that sort of thing. So we will return to your regularly scheduled OSL next month. However, for the $2 tier this time, since troubleshooting PDF would have been probably really short, I'm actually going to do a mindset PDF. So I like to talk about mindset in mini painting. And this time I'm going to be tackling why you're being too hard on yourself. Because I hear this from a lot of people, and I also struggled with this for a very long time, being very, very, very hard on myself. And it actually poisoned my hobby for me for a while. So I want to talk about it, kind of talk about strategies to deal with it, talk about when it's healthy, when it's not healthy, and all that kind of thing. So if you're into it, go sub for the $2 tier to get that PDF. If you're not into it, that's great. We'll be back to OSL next month. Okay, everybody, without further ado, let's tackle some layering troubleshooting. All right, we're using Templar again because I just love, when I'm doing layering, the easiest way to demo is usually on a cloak. It's just the clearest. So where I'm going to start, I'm actually going to use the worst color for layering too. So the absolute worst color to layer, in my opinion, is blue. There's a reason for that. It actually also is a problem with purples. I may have mentioned this already in other videos, but I'm going to go over pretty much everything again in this video, just briefly. So some colors are naturally very dark, but they also tend to be somewhat see-through. So like blues tend to be dark, but also see-through in the natural pigment. And so when you try to layer up, if you're putting on a base coat of something very dark and transparent like this, like our Ritterlich blue here, which is 9115 right here. And then you try to layer up from this. In order to layer up, you are necessarily using a color with white in it. This is cyan blue, 9117. So these are both thinned 4:1, and here they are on the model. But if we try to layer the cyan up over the Ritterlich, we're going to see brush strokes, and it's almost impossible not to see brush strokes. And the reason is that the white in here, like layering is all about opacity. It's all about like how much the paint covers, because you have to make it not cover in order to get a nice blend, right? You're trying to pull the paint to a translucent state by adding water or mediums or whatever you're using. And you're layering that up over and you're trying to make it look like it's like a smooth blend or a textured blend. Either way, it's a beautiful blend, right? But because you're trying to push transparency, when you're using a paint that has more opacity in it, more hiding, more coverage, it's going to fight you. And you're going to have to use more water, right? And in some cases, the presence of white is just white being the most opaque pigment. The presence of white is enough to make it almost impossible to get a smooth blend. So that's the first thing that may be getting in the way. If you're starting really dark with a really dark green or a dark blue, and then you try to layer up with a color that's got white in it, which is pretty much any highlight you're going to be building, it can be very difficult to get that. And the solve for that is just to start with your next color up. So cyan blue has a very small amount of white in it, and I'll do both so I can kind of show you. But if you start with a blue with some white in it, it's a lot easier to get layering to work. So let's actually grab, I've got a couple of colors here, but let's really quick go over those. So Ritterlich cyan, this is 2 drops of cyan with 1 drop of pure white. And this last one is 2 drops of pure white with 1 drop of cyan. And these are thinned, both of these highlight colors right now are 3:2. So it's 3 drops of paint, 2 drops of water in both of these. So let's do a little bit of a comparison here. And I'm going to grab the cyan blue. I'm going to add a little bit of water to it. Just 1 drop. It's already got 1 drop in it. So now it's at a 4:2 or a 2:1 paint to water. And let's try to make some layering out of this. 2:1 is pretty thin, right? You think? Yeah. I've got the paint on my brush. I've got a brush with a good tip. I've got to unload the brush, remember? This is going to talk about this a lot in this video. Unload the brush. So let's just try that. We're like, okay, this looks pretty good, right? We dabbed it a few times on the side of the palette. And now we're going to try to pull it across and see if we can get it to layer. I'm going to get closer. And right away you can see something, right? Right away you can see clearly where those demarcation lines are, right? You thought you were so good. You thought you were going to be able to layer it. But now you can clearly see, and it's kind of smudgy. So part of this is I didn't unload my brush enough, and part of this is the paint is too thick. So you can see there kind of my brush strokes more thick. When you start putting the brush stroke down, if you notice you're getting those thicker lines, that's too much paint on your brush. And if you can clearly see the definition here, that's going to be not enough water. So we're going to actually add 2 more drops of water to this. That's going to put it at a 1-to-1, 4-to-4. 4 drops of paint, 4 drops of water. And we'll try that. But again, we're working with a paint that has a little bit of white in it, and we're going over something that is very, very transparent because it has no white. And blue and black, which are the colors which are in Ridderlich, are pretty transparent pigments unless you're using a very high density black, which we are not in this case. All right, let's tackle the other side and see if this helps. So again, we're going to unload the brush. Now, the more water you add, the more you must unload your brush, especially if you're using a large brush. This is I would call this a medium-sized brush. So I'm going to go again on the other side here. Very thin brush strokes. You can see how much thinner they are now. That's good. But if we get really close, you can still see every brush stroke. Arg! And what is this? Well, this is purely like even me, even myself, being experienced with layering being my chosen technique, like the technique that I do more than any other. Even I cannot make this perfect. Now, it is better, right? Like if you look at this side, you can see the huge globs. Here, the fact that we're getting those little lines, you see, it's creating a little bit of an illusion of a blend. But even then, it's just really hard. And we're at 1-to-1 here. So we can even go thinner and see if we can make it work for more. I'm going to add 1 more or 2 more. Let's go for broke. 6-to-4. So this is a lot, by the way. A lot of water. Remember, we still only have 4 drops of paint in there, and now we've got 6 drops of water. That paint well is not drying out anytime soon. Often, if I know I'm layering, I actually use much less paint in the wells because I know I'm going to be adding a lot of water. So that's going to keep the paint from drying out. Alright, so now I'm going to load up, and once again, I'm going to have to unload more. When you're unloading, if you just kind of look, if you're using a well palette, if you look and you're just like, if you see a big blob of fluid on the end of the ear, or if you can do orderly little lines, then orderly little lines are the best. All right, let's try to do this up here. Let's go out here on the side. All right. So this is looking better. But you can see already that it's not nearly as powerful, right? It's a lot less potent. It's going to take a long time to layer it up, and I can still technically see brush strokes. Let's see here. Oh, that last one's a blob. But so you can still see it. So this right here, that's the effect of that white pigment. This is the fact that the paint you're using has a level of opacity that is just much more than what you're going over. So the way to get around this, though, I would say that this level is okay. And the way to get around it from here on out would be to glaze. So when you do see this, you can I'm going to grab some of my Ridderlich blue. Layering and glazing go hand in hand, remember. If you're not using both, you're not getting the full benefit out of your layering. Colored water, I'm going to go a little strong this time because I want things to pull together. Technically, this is a mistake, by the way, but I'll tell you why in a moment. So I'm using this Ridderlich blue. All right, let's just paint it over the top. Thin coat. Make sure it's not pooling anywhere. Yeah, I can still see all that. Now, my camera is making it look worse than it actually is. But you can still see everything, right? You would have to go back and forth quite a bit to make this really look nice and blended. And the thin paint is really the winner here. You can see how that's actually kind of blending in a little bit, whereas these are still showing you the edges quite profoundly. The other thing you can do is to actually, instead, do not the mistake, take your color that has a little white in it and do a glaze with that instead. That is going to bring up your shadow color a little bit, so make it go a little bit lighter. Notice the glaze is already dried, even though it's like full of water. So let's instead glaze with our lighter color then. So thin coat over the whole surface. If I got bubbles, you can just blow, they'll pop. Come back in and gently pull off any excess puddling that you've got. And let that dry. Now that's going to bring everything up a level. You can see you lost a little bit of that really, really dark blue. But that's not like a deal breaker. Like, you can come back and layer in that dark blue. And this is going to be a little bit better. So as it dries, you can see this is really starting to blend in now over here. And so is this. Take a look at this side. You're starting to get that more of a faded effect. And what we did there is that we put a layer of that lighter blue, which had a little bit of white in it. We put it over the color, and that's acting better. That's essentially giving us somewhere to work up from that has white in it already. In fact, if we go back and now we apply this consistency over the edge of this part, once our paint is dry, we'll probably get a much better blend. So glazing, when you're dealing with these deep colors like really dark purples, working up from that, really dark blues, working up from that, that's some of the things that you can do to try to help if you notice that your layering is just not working. I'm going to just try to pull some of this up. And that's starting to get a bit nicer, you see. And I just did a little bit too much there, so let's pop that up a little bit more on the ridge there. I want that to be light. But so we're starting to see more of a fog, more of a fade. And if you want perfect, this should give you an idea of how much work it is to get perfect layering, to get perfect blending. Like, seamless blending is super hard to do. It takes a long time, has a lot of layering and glazing. You can start, should you wish to start with a dark blue, you can also do a wet blend. So if you are really struggling and your glazing skills are not what you want them to be, you can attempt a wet blend instead. So instead, we're going to start with our really dark, really light blue. I'm going to put that on the side. And then we're going to rinse out our brush, grab our cyan blue, which I've thinned down a lot, so that's probably a mistake, but you get the idea. And we're going to wet blend those together. So I'm going to mix this in gently so that I get that transition. I can also use my layering brush stroke a little bit to try to get those colors to work together. Often you won't get it as dark or as light as the colors actually are, but you get close. So yeah, I've got a little bit of green showing through here because I thinned that color a lot, but you can see that kind of just mucking these colors together, kind of smooshing them, can give you a little bit better of a blend to start out. See, now we're starting to dry a little bit, so I'm seeing, there we go, much better. So if you start with something like this, you can keep that super dark Ritterlich color, and you can create kind of the start of a blend, and then when you layer over the top of this, then things get easier, right? Okay. And this is, I'm just going to layer, you guys can watch, and I'll talk about the things that I have not yet talked about. So one thing is, if you're working with thick paint, you may notice that it gets hard to have the paint come off of the brush, and you may want to use a larger brush. You may want to use a little bit more paint on the brush when you're using your paint thicker, because you can do that. Oh, see, look at that. So 3 to 2, definitely not enough. So let's add more water to that. I'm going to go all the way up to 1 to 2. So 3 drops of paint, 6 drops of water. And you can see that 3 to 2 is not enough thinning. When you put down those first brush strokes and you see those brush strokes, really see them, you're just like, okay. So I added a lot of water, and now I have to unload my brush like crazy. So we were just talking about if your paint is too thick, that you need to put more paint on your brush probably to get it to continue to come off in good solid strokes. But as you thin, as I just did, remember we just went to a 1 to 2 paint to water instead of this 3 to 2. So there's like 3 drops of paint and 6 drops of water. But now with this medium-sized brush, I need to unload a lot, like a lot. I want to have full control of my paint, so I need to be able to not see puddling when I do these brush strokes. Then I know that I've got enough off the brush. Now we can try. All right, so this is a little better. Part of it is that I can do very thin strokes here, so we can create that kind of jagged edge that kind of blends in just all on its own, but you can still see every brush stroke here. So, and that's at 1 to 2, like seriously. So one thing we can do to combat this is we can take our cyan blue, our original base coat, and we can layer it in from the other side, because this was our base. So if we just go over the edge of this, we can help blend that in. So you can see how that's darkening down there a little bit, creating a transition color between these two. And if I continue to do that a little bit smaller every time, I can eventually create a more blended appearance. As you thin, you need to unload more. If you use a larger brush and you're thinning your paint, you are going to need to unload even more. The bigger the brush, the more it will take you the time to unload. If, on the other hand, as you switch to very thin paint, like these 1 to 2 mixes that I'm creating right now, when you're dealing with paint that's hardly like a wash anymore, you can switch to very small brushes, then you won't have to unload as much. Now, you won't be able to necessarily paint quite as long if I switch to a very small brush here, like let me switch to this 000. And just to give you an idea of the contrast here, the one on the left is the one I've been using, and the one on the right is the one that I'm going to use now. So tiny brushes don't work well with thick paint, but they do love thin paint. The reason is there's just not a lot of room in the bristles there to keep the paint wet, right? It can't hold a lot of paint, and so when you use thicker paint with a tiny brush like this, it tends to dry in the bristles really quickly. But if you use thinner paint, the thinner paint has more water in it, and so it's essentially going to keep the paint wet in these bristles for longer. Now, it's still going to dry out faster than a medium-sized brush, but I'm trying to work this up. So this is the one with a lot of white in it, and I can definitely see the brush strokes. So this is why blues cause you to can cause you to completely pull your hair out or switch to an airbrush. But again, the answer is glazing. I'm just going to build up this lighter color a bit first. And the advantage of the small brush is that you can do those tiny little brush strokes. If you have trouble getting thin, even brush strokes, then that's just painting. Like when you paint, just kind of concentrate on, like when you have an opportunity to paint small details on whatever model you're working on, just, slow down, practice having a smooth, even brush stroke when you line, if you're doing lining, and if you don't do lining, you should. It's great practice for brush control. Even if you don't like the style, just do it to build your brush control. So that's coming along, but I can still see, you can see it. I had to turn it so that the camera could see it. So we definitely need to glaze here. And the reason this is showing up so much is that I used 2 drops of pure white in here, and the opacity is just like through the roof. So it's really fighting me. It does not want to go transparent. I would need to probably put, well, let's see, we're at 1 to 2, 3 more drops of water. But yeah, so Essentially, just the more white you use, the lighter color you use, the harder it can be sometimes to get a smooth transition, especially as you're working with something that naturally, you know, blue wants to be transparent. We put white in it, and then suddenly the color is opaque, and the white just takes over everything. Now I've got it even thinner. Now I'm starting to get there. So now I'm having trouble seeing as I pull some of this over the side. I'm having more trouble seeing the brush stroke. See that? So now we're starting, and this is crazy. Like this is a 1 to 3. 3 drops of paint and 9 drops of water to get this white to back off and be nice. And even then, I can still see some of the transition, but it's much better. And then if I want to blend it in, I can go for my glaze, my cyan blue. This time I would glaze with my darker color because it still does have white in it. It's not the Ritterlich. And then as that dries, you can see how that works. There we go. Trying to get the right angle as it dries. So it's starting to fade in a bit here. And again, if I really wanted to, I could go on this side and I could reverse layer with my cyan blue over the edge of this highlight to just try to make it blend in a little bit nicer. But yeah, so that transition is looking really good right there. It's not very it's not punchy, like it's not like going from really dark to really light, but it's still looking pretty good. And as we bring up the color more, we would get there, right? But yeah, so to recap, if you are having trouble with your layering, first check that you're not using a really problematic color and then adding white to it to build highlights, or and remember, any lighter color is going to have white in it. That's a big problem right there, so you may want to switch to using more of your mid-tone color and going down and up. As you thin your paint, you need to unload your brush more. You need to take more paint off your brush. And as your paint gets thinner, a big brush will need a ton of unloading. So often you will need to do a lot more unloading, significantly more dabs to get the paint off your brush if you're working with a larger brush. You can work with a smaller brush in order to counter that, but you really only want to use those when you have really thin paint. I would say at least like a 1 to 2 paint to water ratio. And then the tiny brushes become a little more useful. And finally, if you are having trouble establishing a blend and you really want to start with something like good before you begin layering, you can do the wet blend, put down your dark and work your light into it and just work back and forth to create kind of a decent blend. Like right away, this is a good blend. So if I take this, I actually really like how this green looks with the blue going over it, by the way. So right away, if I take my blue, I need to unload my brush a lot. And if I try to layer that blue up over this, because I already have this blend that I've created, it's automatically going to work better. So using not only glazing, but wet blending along with your layering can give you really beautiful results. So this is already looking more faded in, right? This is actually pretty nice. Not bad. I can still see the lines, but with some glazing and working, it would be fine. So wet blending, starting with wet blending and then working your color up can be a really good fix. And this is why, even though wet blending isn't in my list of must-have techniques, it is an extremely useful one to acquire for your toolbox. Alright guys, that was a long video. I was not expecting it to be that long, but anyway, I hope that this helps you with your layering. If you have any questions, then ask in the comments, please. Have a great day, everybody. Remember, there will not be a $2 PDF for this one. Instead, we're going to be covering mindset in mini painting and being too hard on yourself. All right? Have a great one. This is Anne signing off.